Hello, my wonderful friends. This is the SMC Journal Podcast, and I'm Scott Moore, your host. This show is all about performance engineering in IT today. Today's episode is about WebPageTest. Many of you already know a lot about WebPageTest.org because if you've ever went to that site, you go in and plug in your website. This is what it looks like, and you type in your URL. You set a configuration and you start a test. And once you get done with that test, it tells you how fast your website is, what its score is, and how well Google says your site performs, and things that you can possibly do to make quick changes to make it better performing. Oh, love this site. I've used it for years. Well, we're going to be talking to some people who work at WebPageTest, and they've got something brand new that they've just launched, and I want to talk about that. Before we do, let's talk about the sponsors that make this show possible, and that includes Micro Focus, the makers of LoadRunner Professional, Cloud, Enterprise, and Developer. You know, performance matters to them, and did you know that LoadRunner has the largest community of practitioners in the world? You can find that out by scanning that QR code, going to community.microfocus.com, checking out their LoadRunner family page on the performance engineering site for Micro Focus, as well as checking out their playlist on YouTube of many performance engineering videos. This site is also sponsored by Keysight Technologies. I should say this podcast is also sponsored by Keysight Technologies, who are the makers of Eggplant Performance, another load testing tool that supports web, Citrix, and low-level TCP/IP protocols. It helps you meet your application performance testing needs with real-time monitoring and integrated test results and analysis. Find out more at eggplantsoftware.com. We also want to thank Haymaker Coffee for being the preferred coffee blend of the Performance Tour as well as the SMC Journal. They're now making an espresso blend approved by moi. It's called the 503 blend, and the Performance Tour edition is actually out now. You can go to haymakercoffeeco.com and you can get 10% off of that by using PERF10. That's my code. And you can enjoy some coffee like I do from my friends at Haymaker Coffee Company. And I really appreciate them and Micro Focus and Keysight sponsoring this podcast and supporting the performance engineering community. So webpagetest.org, if you've never used it, go there now and just put in your website and let them tell you what's going on with your site. Look at the scores. Look at your Google basically the critical metrics of performance that you want to know about your front end. Now, this is not back-end performance testing, right? So that would be when we would use LoadRunner and Eggplant Performance and we would load the back end. But we also want to know about the front end as well, because maybe the back end's doing very well, but we have done some things to actually block performance from happening on the front end of our site. Maybe we're making third-party JavaScript calls that are going everywhere and taking up time, and we've got them in the wrong priority, the wrong order. Maybe our CDN is messed up. Maybe our caching rules. Maybe we've got headers that are wrong that need to be changed. Maybe we're putting files out there that are too big, image files. Maybe there's too big of payloads out there for the entire page. There's only so much to physics where you can only push so much through a particular pipe on a particular browser on a particular computer and get back a certain result, right? So that's what WebPageTest.org helps with. Now, recently, there was a press release about a new service, and they're calling it WebPageTest PRO, and it has some additional features, and it is a paid plan, but it's got a lot of cool stuff that you just can't get anywhere else, and I was excited when I heard about it. So I wanted to get some people on the show to tell you more about it, and that leads me to my interview with Jeena James and Tim Kadlec, who I now call Kadlec. Let's go to that interview now. Well, it is wonderful to have my two guests on today from Catchpoint and WebPageTest. I want to introduce to you Jeena James and Tim Kadlec, as I like to call him Cadillac, right? That's going to be his new nickname for me. Why don't you introduce yourselves and tell us all about who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Scott, and excited to be here. I am Jeena. I am on the Catchpoint team, joined as the general manager for WebPageTest about a year and a half back, and have been working with Tim Cadillac and our amazing team since then. And It's a pleasure to be here and talk about all things web performance, as well as like where we are with what innovation we're doing with WebPageTest and Catchpoint.
I'm I'm Tim Kadlec, apparently. Yeah, Kadlec, and yeah, I've joined actually right around the same time as Jeena. I think within a few weeks of each other, and I'm the director of engineering for WebPageTest at Catchpoint. So working on the team with building all this up. And I'm a bit of a performance nut, so I've been using WebPageTest for over a decade. So it's been really, really fun to be working on it now.
Well, you are in very good company because this audience is the hardcore load testing, performance testing group. That's what this podcast is all about, performance engineering and IT today. That's my motto. So welcome, and I'm so glad that we're part of the same crew, right? So I am definitely familiar with WebPageTest from way back in the day, from probably the beginning, and I know many of my audience members use you on a daily basis to check web page sites, especially like if you're a consultant. Like the way that I know it is like I'm going to go to a new company I've never been to. Let's find out how good performance is there. I'll go to their main corporate website and see how important performance is, and then you see this really bad score, and you're kind of walking in there to the company. Hey, I'm going to help you. And they go, that has nothing to do with what we want you to test here, but thanks for checking, right? But it was an education to learn that even very large companies have issues with this. So tell me about WebPageTest and how we get from pre-acquisition of Catchpoint to the acquisition. How did that happen?
When you look at Catchpoint and the product services and just the solutions we have a lot around observability and digital experience monitoring across different departments and teams in a company, and so engineering teams. And there is an opportunity there to also like work with developer audiences. And there isn't anything better, at least at when Mary was talking about it, there weren't too many solutions out there that are as industry considered gold standard, trusted, credible sources of information around web performance as WebPageTest, the open source platform that Patrick Meenan developed over the years, had established itself. And Patrick and Mehdi knew each other pretty well. They had met at Velocity conferences and done a whole bunch of like O'Reilly events, and stayed in touch over the years. So the story goes with them connecting and finding a home for WebPageTest to take it to the next level, and to be able to like actually make those investments that you want in a developer community. So now with WebPageTest within Catchpoint, we actually have that experience for any business, any shape or size, a user, a consumer, whether you're a performance engineer, or whether you are a designer or a developer. You have all kinds of insights that you really need to make your web performance and web optimizations really work and stick. And that is across all roles in a company that looks at performance. And we're going all the way to observability and site reliability engineering metrics that teams look at, which our overall Catchpoint offerings offer. So it's been one of those, the most obvious thing that you can think of, but it also came from years of good relationship between the founders, and to make sure that this really works, because every step, and this is pre, so now if you look at post, every decision we've made, every innovation, the features that we bring in, we're very conscious as a team to make sure that we're not just launching things for the sake of launching, and we're not going to just put a wall up there like you got to pay because you got to pay, versus how is it that we can actually bring more value to all our users and attract more users to take the most advantage out of really good web performance insights out there. And so it's all about driving better value features, and in the process we have fun along the way. We try to try out a bunch of different things that we wanted to do for a while and what our community has talked about, and be able to launch those kind of innovative experiences. And that's been our focus. So we don't want to break what has already worked really well. We only want to keep on enhancing and make sure that everybody gets what they want. I'm going to actually pause here because I know Tim will have a few more things that
That
he's
was
seen
really
along.
good. Yeah, you did good. No, I was going to say that, like, I think, the other angle of this, right, is like, so, from the web page test side of things, right, from Pat's side of things, web page test started as a side project that he had built at AOL years ago and then released. And then it grew, it got massive. And this whole time it was running out of Pat's basement. You can find, photos online of his, web page test world headquarters data center tour, and it's racks of phones and stuff running out of it. I don't want to know what his electricity bills were. But it got to the point where like it was Pat doing this, and he was doing this as he was working other jobs. And WebPageTest kind of, alluding to, I guess, Gina's note about the gold standard thing, like that's the reputation it has in the performance community, particularly for front end analysis, both in terms of the accuracy, the fact that it can use like the low level packet throttling, real browsers, real devices, various locations. I mean, Chrome and Firefox both use WebPageTest to test new versions of the browser to see like how the changes that they're making at the browser level or new standards and stuff, how those things impact performance. And when you have that kind of stuff, in addition to a lot of the organizations that are relying on it, like, it became pretty apparent at some point that it was going to need a team, so we could put like SLAs on availability and, be able to really start unlocking some of those additional features or improvements and stuff, beyond one amazing person, but like, being able to get an actual team on it and stuff like that. So it made perfect sense, I think, from that perspective as well. And yeah, it's like to Gina's point, I think it's been fun. I think we care a lot about web page tests in the web page test community. And so we made sure that from the get-go, we were putting the people in place on the team, and we were paying attention to the community so that like we have a core group of people on this team that care so much about web page test and will protect it at any cost, to the point that like, yeah, we're, everything that we're doing from a feature perspective is always balanced with like, what can we do that's right by the perf community here? What are folks needing? What solves real problems? And that's where that's kind of gone.
How old is WebPageTest, by the way?
Boy, what is that? 14, 15? How many?
2008.
Is that's about right? Yeah.
I knew it was more than 10 years. And so I was going to say, it sounds to me like the original vision for WebPageTest didn't change when Mehdi started talking and Catchpoint makes this acquisition. It sounds like it's just extended, and it's maybe been able to be some more rocket fuel to get you off the ground faster to where you want to go. Is that right?
Yeah, it's exactly right. Yeah.
And let me tell you, I got to say, and Mehdi, I love Mehdi. My show, The Performance Tour, first sponsor, Catchpoint. I can't say anything bad about him, and I love his vision. So, Mehdi, if you're watching, thanks, brother, appreciate it. But watching what has happened over the last, say, 3 years with Catchpoint, with some of the decisions that were made, I mean, I think that it's a great vision, and WebPageTest being one of those. And then more recently, there's a press release that just came out just a few days ago about this new feature, and I'm on the site right now. I'm actually going to bring it up on the screen right now. This is the WebPageTest website as it stands right now, and they're talking, and this is how you would use it from that page, but they talk about WebPageTest PRO and how you can sign up to get some additional features, and they talk about experiments and things that you can do without actually messing with your production site. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Tim, do you want to talk about that new feature set?
Sure. Yeah. So this was a huge launch that the team has been heads down on for months. And we were really, really pumped to get it out because I think there's some really important things here. So WebPageTest always kind of resonated with that power user, right? Like, WebPageTest gives you tons of data. But historically, we kind of stop there and we tell you what, you got to kind of figure out what to do with that data. And so it takes somebody like you, Scott, right? Like looking at the results to be able to like figure out, okay, this is something actionable here. So we know it hasn't been the most approachable necessarily for folks who maybe shockingly don't spend all day with the performance panel of something fired up. I know, right? And so we're at this interesting point too, where like in the industry, like the interest in performance is sky high. The core web vitals stuff that Google's been putting out with the SEO, carrots and stuff, all the things that we've seen the last few years have really brought performance from, gosh, I can remember when you did not hear about performance at regular conferences. You had to go to the performance events, and now any event is covering you're going to have a couple perf related talks. That's where it is. So you have this sky high interest, more people than ever paying attention to it. And we wanted to kind of bridge the gap a little bit. So there's some key features that came out as part of that. One of those is opportunities, which you mentioned. That's our own opinionated set of recommendations around things that we think will help to improve the quickness, resiliency, or usability of your site. And those are based on the experience of the team, really, and feedback from the community. A few of us, myself, Scott Gell, who led a lot of the design stuff on this pro and did an amazing job, have spent a lot of time doing performance consulting. And so it's a lot of the things like that that are baked in, as well as things we've heard from community members and stuff like that. You can think of it as it's kind of like, Lighthouse, right? Lighthouse gives you these sets of recommendations, but we thought it was important to have a set of recommendations that came from a company that, isn't directly attached to a browser. And these recommendations can be pulled from any browser. Like WebPageTest can run tests on Firefox, Safari, Edge, Chrome, Brave, you name it. These recommendations have a strong cross-browser focus, and will continue to do so because we think that's really important. But then the next step was like, okay, so you've got these recommendations. The problem with the recommendations, the nice thing is it tells people, okay, you might want to go look at this thing. The problem is that then the teams are still left to figure out, okay, how do I do this? And what's the impact going to be? And I don't know, you've probably had similar experiences, Scott, but I know I've worked with teams where I find out that, I go in and when they ask, I ask them, what have you done in the past? And they say, well, we tried to do this thing or that. We spent X weeks or months and then it didn't really do anything for us. That's a pretty common thing. So that's where the experiments functionality comes in, which, legitimately we think is a bit of a game changer and really pumped for. And the idea here is like for every recommendation that we can, we're going to give you a one-click, no-code experiment. Like, let's say, for example, we see that your largest contentful paint is an image and it's slow. We're going to give you the opportunity to run an experiment that says, what happens if you preload this image? Or what happens if you use the new fetch priority attribute? And you just click the button, run the test. We run a control in an experiment and give you the results. And that way you're able to see right away, like, hey, this is going to move the needle for us in a meaningful way, or this didn't seem to do that much. Maybe we don't need to prioritize the work on this yet. And the idea is there's no code at all involved. It's meant to be anybody who's looking at those recommendations, whether they know what the heck preload or fetch priority is, it doesn't matter. They can run the experiment and they can see like, oh, it was 20% faster. And now they can go back to whoever needs to make those changes with an actual estimated impact and be able to prioritize that work. So that's the big pieces. And we've got other things like bulk testing and some premium locations and stuff, but those were definitely the two headliner features.
Well, I got to say, I agree. I think it is a game changer, and I think others are going to probably try to follow your heels on this and ride your coattails, because anything that makes performance recommendations more accessible, especially to people who don't focus on it all the time, that's a win-win. That is absolute value added. And then making it known ahead of time before you make any changes, to be able, in other words, if I'm a consultant and I need to advise somebody on a performance thing, being able to say, I know this will actually affect your performance. I've already tested it and done it. Now you just need to make the code changes necessary. And oh, by the way, do it across the board and we can get that gain. Yeah. I mean, that brings value to the people who maybe are being asked to advise that company. Maybe the company's not using or never wants to talk about performance, but they have somebody responsible for it. That is a game changer for them. So I completely agree. And my biggest question then after that is, if I know anything about your company, this is just the first step, and you probably have a lot more plans. Can you, Jeena, can you share any idea of where you plan to take this and of what you can share? Because I would want to know.
Well, the part that we are still sharing is all the nuances that are coming out of every experiment. So I think that's definitely going to continue because opportunities are not exhaustive. We have a ton of opportunities that come out of every test. No two tests come out with the same set of exact same opportunities. So there's that. But also, Tim and team are busy at like bringing out more opportunities and experiments. So one of the things that a part of the experiment is, here's everything on your page that you can actually now figure out if you want to experiment. There's the entire stream of, well, this is not on your page yet, but custom experiments that you can actually build an ad so that you can see if you were to make this change, if you were to swap something that doesn't exist on your site today, what would it look like? So there's a whole lot of what ifs that are not even on your page that you can test. And there's a lot more that can be. And as you can see, I mean, if you've ever taken a look at a request map of any site, the request map that Simon built, you'll see a lot of the third party resources like are pulling in all kinds of directions. And so a website doesn't even like, even for someone who doesn't look at, I don't know how to code. Okay. So for someone who doesn't know how to code, but I just want to see a picture of like how many things are happening on a website, like, a website.com, and you see all these pulls in every different direction. You don't need to know how most of it to actually realize that how ask the question how much of that code is really in your control. And more are getting added every week. There is another company coming and saying, I can do this really well, add my tag. I can do that really well, add my tag. And you suddenly turn that around and say, okay, let me add this tag and see how it's going to improve or not my performance. And turn the question back instead of just adding things blindly and going with whatever happens, and for Google or anybody else to tell you later that it didn't work. So you can actually have a lot of those conversations like front loaded rather than trying to figure it out when it happens. So I didn't answer your question directly on like what is on our roadmap, other than the fact that we're going to keep add more experiments, more opportunities, and then a lot more in terms of like how do you make this more accessible, synthesized information, digestible to anybody who comes to the site. Like from having a test result page that had so much information on that test result page plus so much more behind a JSON, we've come a really long way to like now make specific recommendations around like, hey, is your site fast, is it quick, is it usable, is it resilient, and then let's show you opportunities, let's show you experiments. You dig in if you want to dig in and get into the root cause of everything, but there's so many more layers that can come to prioritize your work before. So continuing to keep improving that experience is definitely on the roadmap, and more features that, Tim, I don't know how much you want to like share about some of the cool things that you've been thinking of.
Come
Um,
on.
so yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's way to put it on the spot there. I mean, honestly, I think anybody who's been watching what WebPageTest has done the last year or so, I think you can probably read the tea leaves a little bit and see some of the things that matter to us a lot. I mean, first and foremost, we know that the depth of the analysis and the accuracy of the analysis is really, really important to us. And we're never going to do stuff that's going to sacrifice accuracy. And we're not going to do things that are going to we're not going to get rid of the fact that you can mine really deep in that data. It's important to us that the folks who need that information can get to it. But at the same time, I think if you're looking at the stuff that we've, some of the improvements and changes that have come up in the UI or, some of these features and stuff, the things like it's really important to us that we're bridging that gap, that we're finding more ways to surface actionable information and connect the dots for folks instead of making them, become waterfall whispers and stuff like that to figure out what's going on. It's really important to us, that we are able to test in multiple browsers. We have relationships with every major browser that we're doubling down on to try and see, what can we do to surface interesting insights from one browser or another based on, what they support, or every browser's got a different perspective on performance. And I think that's important. Like Chrome takes a very different loading, approach to loading the page than Firefox and Safari. Safari and Firefox have very different things that they're looking at from a browser perspective in terms of perf that matters. I know Safari puts some interesting stuff around CPU usage and energy use and stuff like that. So really doubling down on that, because I do feel like there's a plethora of tools that are predicated around Chrome and Chrome only. And so I think it's really important that we make sure that the testing in the other browsers is just as easy to do and as actionable. So I think, the actionability, the cross-browser focus, those are both things. And then like the scenarios. Again, we've got the breadth in terms of the number of locations. We've got the accuracy in terms of the data in the real browsers and stuff like that. There's a lot that comes with that. Like, we have some plans for what could we do around exposing by default, like a better perspective of what does your site look like around the globe, not just in the location you tested, but like, are there CDN issues that you're having in different areas or different markets and countries that might be impacting performance? and making that process a lot more straightforward and coming back as part of a default test result. There are things that we're toying with around, some of the common culprits that people might not pay as close attention to, like, ad blocking and stuff like that. There are a few things kind of in the works there. For the most part, we're pretty public about, I think this was a little bit of an exception. For the most part, though, if anybody hops over at the GitHub repo, we talk about things pretty openly in terms of the stuff that we're kind of working on and heading towards. There's a few surprises, I'd say, that we've got in the pocket, but I think those are the general themes that we're definitely after right now.
It sounds very exciting to me, and I think about the data that you're collecting as people do these experiments and they find out what works and what doesn't work, to be able to come back a year later and say, out of everybody that used this and did this kind of experiment or made these changes, this is the one or two top things that we found brought the most value to improving performance. That alone, being able to share that back to the, I mean, that's big. That's big
going to
news.
be,
So
yeah, we're pretty excited about that too. I think like that ability to be able to look at that data at scale. You can see things like, for example, the HTTP archive, which is a great resource, but they run WebPageTest on millions of sites to power like just general trends and data. And that tells you like where we are today, right? But the potential of the experiment data and being able to look back, like you said, and say like, looks like preload one is, I'm just making this up, but preload is really impactful. Whereas I don't know, inlining CSS isn't, which is not true, by the way. But like, you know what I mean? Like being able to look back at those and being able to say like at scale, these seem to be really big hitters and these aren't. We're absolutely anticipating we're going to find some interesting things there. We already kind of are seeing some where there's a few experiments that reliably seem to move the needle in big, big ways, and other ones that seem to be more hit or miss depending on site architecture. So that's going to be a super interesting thing for us to look at. And there's some interesting things we could be doing with that data too, to try and make some of this stuff a little bit more actionable and intuitive right away.
That's the best part. I mean, at an aggregate level, plus also being able to bring that back into our own in product platform experience, because there's no point just stating it's the same thing, right? Like you can state all the data, but then how does that help anything if you don't bring it back in? And so we're first and foremost like, how does that help for providing the next set of experiences to users? If we do see some, I mean, to this point, I actually, that's one of the better things. And I just thought about it, Tim, as you were talking about it, it got me thinking like, which always is the case, is that if we notice that trend, we could also then, right now, there's no order. We just, like, if you see, there are popular ones that people have, that people are seeing. There's always a possibility for like making those more visible and accessible to folks so that they can try those out. Because at the end of the day, everybody wants to save time instead of going through in-depth information. They want to save time, but they also want to like make sure that they're putting their bets and their time to code or fix in the right places. So anything that helps them do that, will definitely like look at prioritizing those.
So you mentioned, Tim, that you're seeing performance being mentioned in more than just performance-centric conferences and talks and meetups and things, and I totally agree. My thought around that was it's because the role of the people responsible for performance is kind of changing, because we used to have performance testers, performance engineers, systems engineers, and now we have site reliability engineers. There's more of an emphasis now with DevOps on resilience, not just performance. It's not that we don't care about performance, but if your site is not performant, it's not going to be resilient, because you're going to have an outage eventually, either under load or some type of problem like that. But do you think it's because the site reliability engineer doesn't just focus on performance? They have to focus on a lot of different things. There's a lot of stuff they have to be responsible for and automating as much as they can. But performance is a key point, and that's the reason why it needs to be brought up more frequently and more often. Do you agree with that? Because the roles are changing, or is it something else?
I think you've got a combination of things, and I mean, like any situation like this, it's usually never just the one thing that's kind of moving everything, right? So I think part of it is carrots. I think we have seen more carrots and incentives laid down around performance in the last few years. Again, Google has been a huge part of that with their pushes and stuff like that. So part of it is incentives. I think are getting definitely non-traditional roles to do it. I mean, like on the front end performance side of things, there's a lot of interest from the SEO community now around perf. There's a lot more around front end design and development as well, as those things have been emphasized. So, it's that side of things has been picking up a lot of steam from that angle, from the SRE angle. Yeah, I mean, that's another really good point. Like, as soon as you start to, I put out there a couple years ago that like web performance had too myopic of a definition, like in terms of like we look too much at numbers and stuff like that, and that the real definition of web performance should be how quickly and reliably can we get the user to be able to accomplish the task they aim to accomplish. And I think when you look at it from that perspective, then yeah, you have to factor in things like the reliability. I mean, it's almost to it's very big. Like there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, right? Then you've got your reliability, you've got your load testing, you've got what's happening on the server and the back end side of things, what's happening on the front end side of things. But once you start factoring that stuff in, like, and you're looking at it from that reliability perspective, it's also accounting for all those different variables. The different browser conditions, the different network conditions you're going to hit. Like, what can you do to have sort of, fail safes in place when things don't go well? Or, depending on how you want to view that, I guess, how can you build so that it enhances as things get better, that kind of a thing. But basically, I feel like, yeah, I think there's been a shift in really prioritizing that user experience and that user journey that's come from a combination of metrics and incentives and improved tooling. And as that's happened, the roles have expanded, the interest has been, has risen dramatically, and you've got more people paying attention to and prioritizing and budgeting for and planning for that kind of work than ever before. So it's a lot of stuff kind of all rolling into it, I think.
The more we talk about performance, the better, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think it's been as much of a priority as functionality in the past. So that, I get on my soapbox about calling a performance requirement a non-functional requirement, calling it by something it's not. Come on, we can do better than that. And we always suggest calling it an operational requirement. Otherwise, we should call functional requirements non-performance requirements, right? So we don't want to have that battle, right? But I think this is important. So if people want to find out more about what you're doing with WebPageTest and Catchpoint as a whole, what would they look at? Where would they go?
Catchpoint as a whole, catchpoint.com. Catchpoint has a blog where we're always posting about anything new, anything around new features, new functionalities, case studies, as well as thought leadership around different areas, observability, digital experience monitoring. WebPageTest.org. One word, webpagetest.org. And we also have our own developer-centric blog and developer documentation, as well as forums, Twitter channel, which is so much more than just a social platform for us, because you'll follow threads there and you'll see problems get solved and feature requests are worked on. It's pretty fascinating. And what else? I'm missing something. Twitch,
Live stream.
a live stream. We have every other Thursday. We have live audits. The last week and this week and a couple of weeks down for the next few weeks, we will have more streams, just because obviously we've launched a bunch of new experiences, and so we're going online and talking about many of them in the context of live website audits. So staying tuned. On our website, we have this section called events, so you can follow up with everything there, or subscribe to the Twitch channel, and then YouTube, where we have all the videos posted and live there too concurrently. Tim, am I missing something? Anything?
I think you pretty much nailed it. I think that covers pretty much all
Yeah.
of it. Yeah.
I think the website is the first place, because the homepage, I mean, it's very utilitarian. You get what you see is what you get, and you get more than what you see. It's literally that.
I agree. And actually, we've had episodes where I used webpagetest.org to test smcjournal.com and showed why I got the scores that I did, and how I had to make certain modifications, and how I got dinged on the mobile side because of the image types that I was using. And so it was a great experiment for me, to not rip you off with the word, but it was actually a good lesson to be taught in that. So I'll refer people back to that. I'll share any of the links that you mentioned on our show notes and all that. But I really want to thank you again for being on the show to talk about this, and you're welcome to come back anytime.
Awesome. Thanks. It was fun.
Thank you. Okay, so you can tell I'm a little bit of a fanboy, and I really like these people. They're really good people, and if you didn't know that, well, now you do. What do you think about the new WebPageTest Pro? I'd really like to know. You can tell me by contacting me through my website, scottmoore.consulting. There's a link to my LinkedIn profile, as well as my Twitter handle, LoadTester. I'm also available by email at help@scottmoore.consulting. If you like this kind of content and want to see more, be great if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, where you can see not only the episodes of SMC Journal, but also the performance tour stuff that's coming out and any of the skits and things that I release. And if you haven't seen any of my musical skits, you probably need to see those, because you might need a good laugh today. So thanks for watching. This is Scott Moore for the SMC Journal podcast, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.